Hey kiddies, it's Triple Feature Tuesday once again, and this week we're looking at Meatloaf on the Table. That's right, this one's going to be a quickie, because things. Anyway, Meatloaf, Marvin Aday, the really great singer and stage performer, has been in several things in which he ends up on a table and or for dinner. Our menu is going to include Fight Club, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, and Tales from the Crypt, the episode What's Cooking. In Fight Club, the brilliant adaptation by David Fincher of Chuck Palahniuk's breakthrough novel of the same name, Meatloaf plays Robert Paulson, a former juicer, weightlifter, who befriends the narrator at one of the several support groups that the narrator goes to feel better about himself. And later, Robert joins Fight Club and then Project Mayhem. It starts out as Fight Club and then it turns into Project Mayhem, but we don't talk about that because of the rule. Unfortunately, during Operation Latte Thunder, the either security guards or police shoot at the Project Mayhem members and unfortunately kill Robert Paulson, and they bring him back to the Project Mayhem headquarters on Paper Street and lay him out on the table. And it's at that point that members of Project Mayhem understand that while they are in Project Mayhem, they have no name. But in death, they do have a name, and his name was Robert Paulson. His name was Robert Paulson. His name was Robert Paulson. Meatloaf is really good in Fight Club. He's just this really sort of like a one-note joke character with, these gigantic boobs. He's actually the only character in the movie that disobeys one of the rules of Fight Club. He fights with a shirt on, but presumably it's because the makeup effects in making Meatloaf look like he has actual female mammaries would have been really silly in the fights. But in this one, in Fight Club, he's not dinner. Or at the very least, he's not human dinner. They do bury him in the book. They explain they bury him out in the garden in the back, and so he becomes dinner for the worms and the plants and everything. But in Fight Club, he's not human dinner, as opposed to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Meatloaf plays Eddie, a rock and roll asshole / former boyfriend of Dr. Frank-n-Furter. It's at least implied. But Frankie tires of people, especially Eddie. And part of Eddie's brain ends up in Rocky, which is why Rocky is so monosyllabic. Except in the musical numbers, which is always weird. Either way, Eddie breaks out of the vault and causes a lot of trouble singing rock and roll Hot Patootie. Or is it Hot Patootie rock and roll? Either way. Frankie interrupts Frankie's big party / science demonstration / breathing life into Rocky. And so, what else can Frank do but hack him into pieces with an axe? And so we thought we had seen the last of Eddie. But then, during the dinner sequence, after Professor Scott explains the reason he actually came here is that he's Eddie's uncle and is looking for him because Eddie sent him a letter saying that there are nefarious things happening at the Castle Frank-n-Furter. Dr. Frank-n-Furter says that Eddie is a tender subject while they're eating nondescript white meat. And then after Dr. Scott's song about Eddie, Frank pulls the tablecloth back to reveal that Eddie's corpse has been underneath the table the whole time, and more than likely they've been eating Eddie, which didn't seem to bother Rocky at all. Everybody else got a little queasy. But so Meatloaf became dinner in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Maybe not necessarily intended to, but oh well. He's the other white meat. Finally, we have an episode of Tales from the Crypt, and normally I would not use television shows, but since each episode of Tales from the Crypt is essentially a half-hour short film, I think there's a little leeway, and plus it's my video series, so you can just go somewhere else. In the 4th season episode, What's Cooking, starring the always wonderful Christopher Reeve and the surprisingly enjoyable Judd Nelson. You have to understand, this is Yeah, well into the 90s, past Judd's can't do anything wrong phase. Christopher Reeve is a struggling restaurateur uh, who is struggling. I don't know why he's struggling. His restaurant only serves squid in a variety of different ways. And yet somehow people just don't care and don't want to eat it. And it's causing all sorts of stress on Christopher Reeve and his wife Bess Armstrong. If for no other reason than their landlord, played by Meatloaf, is giving them nothing but shit because, hey, they seem to not want to make money and or pay the rent on their restaurant. So enter vagrant Gaston, played by Judd Nelson, who volunteers. He's got a really snappy recipe for steak. If they want to try something other than squid, and one day they do, and it turns out it's a really big hit. Everybody loves this steak, and I mean the question is though, where did Gaston, who's borderline employed and more than likely homeless, how did he get all this steak? So he brings Christopher Reeve back into the fridge to get more meat, and it turns out the meat is Meatloaf, and he's oh god, Tales from the Crypt was so good. Meatloaf is hanging like a side of beef, and Judd Nelson is just hacking into the corpse, taking stuff out of him, to put on the grill. And what makes Tales from the Crypt so much fun is that Christopher Reeve and Bess Armstrong, once they find out what it is, they just sort of go with it. Because they're making money, and everybody in Tales from the Crypt land is a jerk. I won't reveal how it ends, but there are twists and turns, and Meatloaf stays dead, surprisingly. But he is, so for dinner, it's not funny. I mean, everybody's eating him. It's really wonderful. So, this was Meatloaf on the Table, Fight Club, Rocky Horror Picture Show, and the What's Cooking episode of Tales from the Crypt. And I'll see you guys next week.